By 2000, the first wave of poetry organisers had broken on the shore, and a new wave of organisers was rolling in.
I first saw Passionate Tongues advertised in the Age What's On section. Probably would have been about April, May 99, and this is only when Passionate Tongues was just a few months old, and it was 10 minutes walk from my house. So I went, I said, this is good. The only two gigs that I'd ever been to before that was Dan O'Connell and the and Builder's Arms poetry. So when I showed up at the Cornish Arms, or the Brunswick Rainbow as it was called then, I got there and there was nobody there. I sat around going, what's going to happen here? I didn't know it, but there was some kind of poetry festival happening across town. I think it was at Chapel off Chapel, something like that, which the host was attending. So there was a stand-in host, John Beaton, and your very good self. You were the first feature that I saw at Passionate Tongues. And you and John Beaton walked in together, took a look around, and I remember very well it was you that said, he came here to listen, I'm going to read poetry. And yes. That was my introduction to Passionate Tongues poetry.
How about that? Now, what was the address of that venue?
It was in it's now the Cornish Arms, and it's in Sydney Road, Brunswick. I can't remember the exact address.
I feel like a mammal, bloody mammal, caged in the language of singular intention, with keepers of shops holding keys to my needs, more like an alley cat than blossom in the trees, stalking the shopping malls for strokes of my ego. I feel trapped in the web of the language of success. My anxious heart is beating out a rhythm of concern for warm-blooded creatures in these hard, cruel times. Breathe is the god of this new world order, with a clock in his head, waiting in the wings, counting his money, watching our every move, biding his time. I feel like a mammal, bloody mammal. Oh, I feel like a mammal, bloody mammal, caged in the language of singular intention, with keepers of shops holding keys to my needs, more like an alley cat than possum in the trees, stalking the shopping malls for strokes of my...
When did you start your first poetry event in Melbourne?
In Melbourne, 2000.
And where was that?
At the Duke of York in Windsor. Duke of Windsor.
The Duke of Windsor.
In Windsor.
And can you remember some of the poets you had in the early days on?
Well, I had, the very first was Peter Bukowski, because he had come to the spinning room in London, and Peter Merck, who'd helped me start the spinning room in Melbourne, knew Bukowski. So he was the first on, and that then became a tradition. Mm. And we had you, McBride, Lauren Williams, Kerry Scuffins. God, it's a long time ago.
Alighting at Spencer Street, find new signs, new shops, steep, enormous new buildings. The cranes wave mirthfully. I only left for 3 weeks. Seems I don't know my city from 1 week to the next. And this vexes me a little. I was hoping for pause, my city so desperate for applause. Can't we be still a moment? Must I be made to feel my presence makes so little dent? This constant blurry upward-outward rush does not make us special. So many other cities I have known for a time, considered to dwell, are moving at the same alarming pace. This race we're all in holds precious little charm. Couldn't you take a rest, Melbourne? Dip your breast to the ground and sleep? I don't want to hear a peep from you until we've had some time to take in all these new views you keep throwing up, like a bulimic Supreme Court judge, riddled with guilt but responsible to no one, only wearing his best little black dress where no one can see. You're a mess, my city. Can't see where you begin and end, except that we can still chart your river bends. Now shadowed some by rising apartments, but still filled with wonder at the places where the trees shut out the metropolis. Small moments of unutterable bliss, memory of what we were before our edges began to blur. I'd moved out of my parents' house. I was living in East Brunswick, and at some point I went, I'm travelling to Ballarat to go to poetry gigs. There must be something in Melbourne. How do I find out, pre-internet, how do I find out what the hell, where are the poetry readings in Melbourne? They must be something. And I found a listing for the reading at the Builders Arms. I think I found the Builders Arms and I found the Art House. So the Builders was the Sunday afternoon gig that Patrick McCauley ran, and then the Art House was the Monday night sort of poetry, comedy, all sorts of different things. I discovered the Dan, I think probably through going to the Builders Arms, and so I started going to the Dan, and then I would just go to everything. I would go to whatever was on, and then from there, doing a lot of readings, and then starting to MC gigs, and obviously you have to have a much more direct relationship with the audience when you're MCing gigs. So I started MCing a little bit at Revolver for the East Tuesday gigs that Emma Ireland was running, and then started running other gigs from that. And then I started doing a theatre course because I figured out that there was a way that I wanted to perform my work that I didn't necessarily feel like I had the skills to do that. And so I did the theatre course at NMIT that had a fairly large performance component. If a city has a soul, I am that soul. I travel lightly and see all. If a city has a heart, I beat erratically, rising and falling with the traffic flow. If a city has breath, some days I hold mine, ever expectant, full of hope and concern. If a city has a memory, I forget nothing, mark each change to ensure continuity. If a city has life, I feel older than I am, look younger than I feel, refuse to die.
Als de sloot, er zijn kikkers in de sloot, groene kikkers. Dat weet je, dat is je verteld. Dat er kikkers in de sloot zijn, dat hebben ze je verteld. Je hebt het te druk om je heen te kijken, omdat je altijd zoveel ziet, dat je eigenlijk niet begrijpt. Je kijkt om je heen en ze doen maar, dat gaat verkeerd, dat gaat nooit goed, daar krijgen we last van, soeda. Je kijkt weg, je kijkt ergens anders. Je ziet niets wat je zou kunnen afleiden van wat je juist gezien hebt. Je kijkt naar de grond, je kijkt naar binnen, je hoort je eigen stem. Hier ben ik en daar staan zij, maar ik ben hier in dit lichaam, op deze grond en ik loop op deze grond. Er zijn kikkers in de sloot, groene kikkers. Je kijkt om je heen, je handen op je rug. Kikkers, groene kikkers, dat hebben ze je verteld. Die waren hier, die hebben dat zelf gezien. Er zijn kikkers in de sloot, groene kikkers. Ze horen je stem die zingt over de ooievaar, een hele grote vogel. Het land van de
The cymbal player. Oh, to be a cymbal player in an army band, arms raised in supplication, considering the almighty bang. As serious as an ice skater on a concrete floor, I'd smack my cymbals to the glory of the Lord, and all the band would fade away and die from lack of love. But to be a cymbal player in an army band would mean to march in unison, keep time, and with striking stance I'd stride among the instruments, my golden hands impertinent with haste, paying reverence to music and falling right in line behind the bass. So march we will and dance we won't, and play the tunes as best we can. That's what I'd do as a cymbal player in an army band.
So this was the very first Overload Poetry Festival. I talked to my partner at the time, Sandra McLeod, and I said, I've got this idea. She said, that's great, I don't want anything to do with it. Happy to turn up, but you know, I'm busy, I've got a lot of stuff going on. And then, you know, once she saw what a mess I was potentially going to make of it, she came in and was very involved. But essentially, the way that Overload came together was, I think I had an email address, but a lot of people didn't at that time. And so I just got on the phone and I called every poet I could think of that I had a phone number for and said, if we put this on, do you think it's a good idea? Do you want to be involved? And 2 or 1, they all said yes. And And after, 50 phone calls or whatever it was, I went, oh crap, now I actually have to do this because I've told people it's happening. And I'm getting phone calls from people going, what's this festival thing?
So, Steve, the idea was to incorporate a festival that incorporated the venues presently operating.
Yeah, so at that point, you had the Dan, I think the Builders was probably still going. Andy Jackson was running Good Morning Captain in Collingwood. Good Morning Captain was in there. I was running a reading with Pete Salmon at the Barleycorn in Collingwood. Michael Reynolds was already running Passionate Tongues in Brunswick. You got the Art House, the Celtic Club, Babel, Fitzroy was on the Dan.
La Mama.
I'm not sure if La Mama was in this one. I mean, La Mama obviously was reading, but it tended to depend on La Mama's schedule, whether that fit with Smith Street Bar and Bistro. I think Patrick Alexander was running that at the time. I was co-running a very strange event at Lentil as Anything in St Kilda called the Lentil Bash. And so that was up and running at that time. Me and Owen and Hanan Palacio. So that was poetry, music on the footpath outside, because Lentil as Anything Cafe is way too small. So we did the gig outside on the footpath. Wasn't entirely legal, but so there were a lot of events happening, and we wanted to have a festival that would bring promotion directly to the regular gigs.
Okay, now that's 2002.
Yes.
But that's the start of practically 11 years of running an Overload.
The festival ran for 10. I was director for 6. So initially it was me, Sandy, Tom Reimer, Tom Roker, who was known as Tom Reimer at the time, who put in the initial money, because the first year we didn't have any funding. He knew Ali Elizadeh from when they went to school in Queensland, and Ali actually called us and said, I know this guy, he's just moved to Melbourne, he has some money put away that he wants to put in to something very much like what you're doing, because I think Tom had volunteered for the Queensland Poetry Festival in their first year, and they were just sort of a couple of years ahead of us. And so we started like a poetry street press called Deadline, and then the first festival, and we worked from home and ran off the smell of an oily rag. And then the second year, third year, fourth year, we started to get funding from local councils, from Arts Vic. So the festival in total, I think, went from 2002 to 2011.
Well, the Brunswick Rainbow only lasted about 18 or so months before it was sold and renovated. So I moved down the street to the Cumberland Arms, and it was there for exactly 1 year. And that place got sold. It's now I think it's now it's residences. From there, it went to the Retreat Hotel. It was there for a couple of years.
The retreat in Brunswick?
Yes, yes, near the corner of Dawson Street, Glenline Road. And then after that, it went over to the Noise Bar, which is the hotel on Albert Street, just off Sydney Road, near Brunswick Station, the Railway Hotel. And it was there for several years, and it again closed. So there was a number of venues in the early days, in relatively quick succession. So I started getting the reputation of closing down venues with my poetry gig, and some people were calling me the demolition poet.
G'day, Anthony.
Hello, Ken.
Now, I'm talking to Anthony today about his part in the history of Melbourne poetry venues. Anthony gathered a wonderful reputation of being the kind of Graham Kennedy of poetry venues, probably one of the best MCs. Funny, erudite, and a guy who could generally keep the peace. Now, Anthony, when did you come into the Melbourne poetry scene?
It's about 2001 or 2002. I sort of randomly wandered into a poetry reading and enjoyed it, and enjoyed what I saw, and was already a writer and had been since I was a teenager. But had never really shared it. I wasn't publishing or looking to publish. It was just something that I did. And I started attending the spinning room in Paran quite regularly. I lived in the area, and the Dan O'Connell poetry sessions on Saturday afternoons quite regularly. It was an awakening in as much as it changed how I looked at poetry. I was a very traditionalist. I was studying classical literature at the time, and it was one of those people who thought no good poetry had been written in 150 years, that it was all already said and done, and modern poetry was just a load of old clap or new clap. But I saw people I really admired and heard poetry from people who really opened my eyes to the modern take on the art form.
First you did not love enough, and afterwards you loved too much. You lacked the confidence to choose. You have only yourself to blame. inside the festival. But you chose the one more beautiful each year. She was the golden choice in dream. Would never mutilate. And now your left arm has got used to stretch out, to feel the edge of your mattress by your street lit wall. It's forgotten how to hold someone when they're too tired to love. It aches under the pitfall.
And within a sort of year and a half or so of attending the spinning room, I was asked to start hosting with John Garrett. About 2004 I started hosting, and then for the next 7 years I was the co-host of a weekly Tuesday night gig, and was really heavily involved in attending other gigs as well. Most weeks it was 2 or 3 gigs, or sometimes 3 or 4 gigs that I'd attend whilst working a day job, and trying to ingratiate myself into the art form and get features and stuff, but also help run things and organise things so that other people had a chance to get their art out there, which is what I always thought was the most important part.
It's forgotten how to hold someone when they're too tired to love. It aches under the pitfall of transient desire. First you did not love enough. Afterwards you loved too much. You lacked the confidence to choose. You have only
some years you were working with Anthony O'Sullivan.
Yeah,
Was that towards the end? Or
that was towards the end.
Okay, and was that ETs?
That was at ET.
Okay. And that was just really to take the load, was it? You know?
Yeah, I brought him on because for a number of reasons actually, because he was he was so much younger than me, and he had done so well by getting the call back. That was another feature. Also, it's calling someone back from the open mic. And there's a lot about him that reminded me of myself when I was his age. And, you know, he was, his dedication to poetry as an art form, as a thing, impressed me.
Terrific.
But
yeah.
also there was a showmanship. And we worked incredibly well together. You know, I mean, a lot of people thought we spent a lot of time rehearsing, and we didn't. We gelled and continue to. You know, Melbourne, what was, in the first place, what was very good was how healthy I thought the scene was, in as much as it wasn't closed off. There were more open gigs. You know, hence, you know, when we got to the idea of overload and calling it overload, because there were so many, and it was slightly, I think a better title might have worked, but that was very successful. I mean, I was chair of that for 3 years or whatever it was. And that was very, very successful because there were so many. And that in itself was inspiring.
I shall now distribute the microphone to the author.
Well, I'm just going to stay doing what I'm doing for the moment because I'm in a great amount of poems, making a great amount of pain. So if you will bear that twice, I'm sure I can see your head a little later. This is just Nebuchadnezzar. For the painting by Arthur Boyd, for Sonny Booth and Lionel Rhodes, and in the voice of Sonny Booth. But I am Nebuchadnezzar. My balls are caught tight with white wire. I am caught in extremis styling, paying the price for the poor.
For I am Nebuchadnezzar. My balls are caught tight with white wire. But I am caught in extremis, falling, paying the price for the poor. My body it pays with the fire.
I feel like a mammal, bloody mammal, caged in the language of singular intention, with keepers of shops holding keys to my needs. More like an alley cat that blossom in the trees, stalking the shopping malls for strokes of my ego. I feel trapped in the web of the language of success. My anxious heart is beating at a rhythm of concern for warm-blooded creatures in these hard, cruel times.
But After the noise bar, I wanted to get it back onto Sydney Road, and I waited till the next Monday night to see what the venues were like on Monday nights on Sydney Road. And my first port of call was the Brunswick Hotel, and I went in there, I sat at the bar, and there was a 4-piece band playing on a Monday night to me. I was the only audience member. And behind me, the publican and his manager were talking, and the publican said, "How are we going to get people in here on a Monday?" And I turned around and said, "I might be able to help you there." And he said, "How?" And I said, "Poetry." "What?"
Papers of shops holding keys to my needs, more like an alley cat than blossom in the trees, stalking the shopping malls for strokes of my ego. I feel trapped in the web of the language of success. My anxious heart is beating at a rhythm of concern for warm-blooded creatures in these hard, cruel times. Breathe.
It sounds like Overload was a pretty apt name.
Oh, I mean, the name specifically came from just the amount of gigs that were on at any given time.
Okay, now, during this period of the festival, had you produced any booklets of your own, or had recordings or anything of yours?
I think my first publication that I produced was called Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's Some More Bollocks. And then I actually launched my first CD. Big mistake. I launched my first CD that I recorded with Matt Duffy from Boatful, who I knew through the Ease gigs. So we'd recorded this sort of 7-track kind of mini album, and I launched that during the first festival. Running a festival and producing and launching your own album at the same time, terrible idea. I think it's a good album, I think it holds up, but trying to launch that, I mean, we were burning the CDs and putting the stickers on and printing the covers, right up to the point where we had to get the box to the launch to do the gig.
Melbourne, so livable, you want to mess it up.
Melbourne, better looking, better dressed, and yes, better in bed.
Melbourne, Sydney's sexy little brother.
Melbourne, there's a harbour here too.
The grid that keeps on giving.
Not quite bigger than Jesus, but bigger than McCartney. Slap!
Fashion Week times 52.
Melbourne, night, life.
Melbourne, this cool, all the time.
With legs like this, who needs a tit job?
If you're bored here, you're just not trying hard enough.
We're not bored, we're just drawn that way.
We don't mean to toot our own horn. No, wait, actually we do.
We might be wankers, but...
Come for the coffee. Stay for the... coffee.
This is between us and Sydney, Brisbane, you stay out of it.
Melbourne, the old black.
Melbourne, the city around the casino.
The city around the billboards.
Hey Seinfeld, ain't it this?
More changeful than Jekyll and Hyde.
Well, the outer suburbs bled her until inspiration came. No more bitch fights on lousy bus stops. She had her own protection. That first poem on the back of a McDonald's wrapper, the books she'd stolen from chain stores. No one was curious, just thought her odd.
What other venues might you have gone? You were doing the spinning room with John. Where else would you have gone to attend?
I was a Dan regular. Passionate Tongues I went to quite regularly. In the later years of the 2000s, Jeff Lemon ran a gig called Blue Velvet, which was at a bar called Blue Velvet on Smith Street, and I attended that quite regularly and performed there, and also hosted when he was off gallivanting around South America, which he did on the reg. There was quite a few gigs that maybe didn't last that long, but were that I would frequent. There was some pop-up gigs and stuff, but also like Scarlet on Smith Street, which ran for I think a couple of years, where they had a jazz band playing behind you as you read. Lentil as Anything in St Kilda had a gig that I went to quite regularly, that Steve Smart hosted most of the time. The ones that had open mics were I can't remember their names, but I remember attending. And then of course there was the figurehead gigs, the feature only gigs like La Mama, that I would attend as an audience member and a fan.
Because back in those days, it was it was fairly it was fairly difficult to convince people to run poetry gigs, especially in pubs in Sydney Road. Even in the mid '90s, even then, in this would have been 2007. The pub culture was still very much alive in Brunswick, and as pubs started closing in rapid succession, that's when spoken word events started coming up, and so we were their busiest night for quite some time. Passionate Tongues lasted there for just over 11 years, I think, and then March 2018. When you pick a feature performer, you need to pick someone who's going to inspire people on the open mic. I like to get the regular audience to see as big a variety as possible, and the open mic is just as important as the feature performer as well. I wanted new readers to feel like they were being listened to. And the best advice about hosting that I was ever told was see what you like in every host that you see, and pick the best out of each one of them. And I think I base most of my MCing on what I've seen, what I used to see John Ashton do with his gig A Different Light all those years ago.
Yes.
And also Steve Smart. He's taught me a lot, we both started together in the scene, and he was hosting gigs around about the same time I was, but he's the one that actually showed me, just be yourself. You don't have to be the big showman or anything like that. You just get up there and you just show your appreciation, just like everyone else, while you've been the host. When I say that Steve and I started together in the scene, we started doing open mic spots around about the same time, but the big difference was Steve was already a poet. I was the newcomer who said, "Oh, I'm going to give this stuff a try." So yeah, I was before going to poetry gigs, I'd never even written a poem.
A parking lot filled with the vehicles of strangers, a Gulf Stream sweeping south to where the glaciers wait.
I remember Shelton used to say, and he used to love to tell people that, you know, in the 70s, oh geez, I didn't think it could get any bigger than that. And then in the 80s it got bigger. And then in the 90s, and by the end of the 90s I was like, well, there's no way this is getting any bigger. And then it just got bigger. And, you know, and in the years after Shelton passed, it just kept getting bigger.
Plastic bags, plastic bags.
Plastic bags, plastic bags. People keep giving me plastic bags.
People keep giving me plastic bags.
Every time I shop I get a plastic bag.
Everything comes in plastic bags.
Glad wrap, bubble pack, styrofoam, party pack. It's all plastic and it's all
crap.
Plastic plates, knives, forks, spoons, cups, caps, bowls, boxes, bins, buckets and plastic bags.
Angel, you angel, you angel, you angel.
When did you first take the birthday photo at the Dan?
The first one I took was in 2000, so that would have been the 6th birthday.
6th or so, yes.
And I mean, the very first, or one of the very first gigs that I sat through in its entirety was the 5th birthday celebration of the Dan Poetry. I mean, I was there to play Scrabble with someone in the corner, and Ted Lord, who I'd known through the 100 Pint Club at the Dan O'Connell, at the end of the gig, he came up to me and said, "Oh, I didn't know you liked poetry," and I said, "I don't." not meaning I hated it. I was just very indifferent to it, and I thought about that afterwards, and I've always told people, if you go and see a band that you haven't seen before and you don't really like them, see them again.
Mm-hmm.
They might have had a bad day, or you might have had a bad day, or a combination of the two. There might be something about them that you appreciate the second time that you see them, and I thought, if I'm going to say that about music, you know, why can't I say that about poetry as well? And so I started going to to a few of the poetry gigs, and after a while I just said, oh, I'll give this stuff a try.